Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here tonight. Um, we have a quorum, um, so we are good to vote. And I think the only thing we have to vote on actually is our administrative items, which are up first. So if anyone needs to leave, that's the only actual voting item we have tonight. So I'll call the meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. Any amendments to the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to the first item, which is the approval of the minutes from our August 26th meeting. Remember, we did meet in October. That was just sort of a meet and greet, so we have no meeting minutes. We didn't conduct any business. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the August 26th, 2025 meeting minutes. Thank you, Steve Lemke. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Dan. I have a motion by Steve, a second by Dan to approve the August 26, 2025 meeting minutes as written. Any discussion, comments, or corrections? All right, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand, either virtually or actually, and just give me a minute to make sure I see everybody. Okay, put your hands down. Andy Snelling, I didn't see anything from you, an up or down. So I'm assuming you did, you're not a yes. So everyone put their hands down. Virtual hands down. Otherwise I get confused. All right, anyone, a nay? Anyone's a no on the votes? Say it out loud for me. Okay, we have no nays. Any abstentions? I don't see any abstentions. So motion passes unanimously. If anyone abstained or said or is voting no, let me know right now. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. The meeting minutes are approved. All right, so I'd like to welcome Janet Hurley from the Land Use Review Board, who's with us tonight. We invited her to come, and I just want to give a couple of comments about how we're going to run tonight. And really, our meetings is usually, I would really like to start following our rules of procedure consistently. I feel I've gotten a little lax. So just so everybody knows how we're going to roll through tonight's meeting. As usual, please mute your mics if you're not speaking. If you want to comment or ask a question, please raise your hand. I'm going to acknowledge you in the order I see you. That might not be the actual order you raised your hands in, but the order I see you. And then take yourself off mute so that we can hear your question or comment. Our goal is always to try to get a breadth of comments, like a wide range of comments, and wide range of participation. So per our rules of procedure, if you've asked a question, and you want to ask another question, anyone who has not yet been heard from goes to the front of the line, gets priority. Okay? So don't be offended if you've asked one question and I don't call on you. I call on somebody else who hasn't spoken yet. That's the reason why. And again, comments, this is when I reviewed our procedures today, if you can tell. Our comments should really be addressed to the entire board. So what I want to avoid is having sort of a two-person discussion going back and forth, okay? And I'm going to try to keep to time. You know, this meeting is going to run for a full hour and a half, basically. We have a lot on the agenda, so I am going to cut things off in accordance with the time on our agenda. So don't be offended if there are questions pending. But at, when our scheduled endpoint is, I'll talk to Chris and staff and we'll figure out, do we address things offline via email, or do we, maybe bring somebody back to speak or have a further conversation about it, okay? So again, don't be offended, please. And then just to give some background for today's agenda, Janet Hurley's going to be here. She's going to sort of give us high-level overview of the LRB's work. I know we're all very excited about this, having a new sort of, legislation being put in place related to land use. Always excited for the Planning Commission. And specifically, I'm hoping that we get information about what, the things that apply to the WRC, which would be, regional planning and Act 250. And then just to let people know, we have Matt and Alyssa here today, who are senior staff members. And after Janet speaks generally about, the LURB, they are here to speak about the status of our regional plan specifically, right? Like we all approved our regional plan in July as a commission. It went into effect September 2nd. We knew we were going to have to sort of revise it based on some guidance from the Land Use Review Board, because we didn't submit it to the Land Use Review Board for their review, given that the legislation is new and there's still ongoing rulemaking going on. So we knew we were going to have to do this. It's not a surprise. We wanted to make sure we updated our regional plan in July, so we went ahead and did that. But Matt and Alyssa are going to sort of come full circle and talk after Janet about how does this really apply to our current regional plan and what next steps do we have to take. So if you do have specific questions about that, I'm going to ask you to hold until after Alyssa and Matt have spoken. Maybe you'll get your questions answered then, okay? But that's sort of how we have the agenda rolling out for tonight. And that's the end of me talking. Since we do have a guest here, and I'm already off schedule because it's 6:11 and we have her speaking at 6:10. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet and thank her for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Gabby. I am Janet Hurley. I'm actually a resident of the region, Winhall, and I am the chair of the new Land Use Review Board. So I'm going to give you an overview of the board's work, and it will touch upon the regional plan application process. I'm going to share my screen, and Gabby, if you can, it will. If it's successful, all I'll see is my slide. So if you can keep track of who's raising hands and whatnot, and I think it might make sense to try to keep questions to a minimum until I get through the entire presentation. But I'm not opposed to answering questions along the way. So will you tell me whether you see the slide presentation after I share my screen? Thank you. So wait a minute. Window. Aha. Okay. Share. And
you're good.
And you're seeing the slide view.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So stop me if something happens via voice, because all I can see is the slide. So about 55 years after its enactment, Act 250 underwent major reform, and that was via Act 181 of 2024. It sets up a new jurisdictional framework for state land use permitting. The previously jurisdiction of the Act 250 program was by project size in combination with whether a particular municipality had zoning and subdivision regulations. So it was mostly larger projects that triggered the need for an Act 250 permit. And in towns that had zoning and subdivision, the projects were larger than the ones that didn't in terms of triggering. The only geographic trigger is that activities above 2,500 feet trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. So I'm going to go over what Act 181 put forward for changes to Act 250 after 55 years. Basically, in short, the Act implements a phased approach to changes in the organizational structure, the staffing of the program, jurisdiction for permitting, and also expanded the board's authorities and responsibilities, particularly toward regional plans across the state. One of the things that Act 181 did is it put in place interim housing exemptions, and those are in place now. There are housing exemptions that are tied to buffered areas around centers throughout the state. It also established 10 consistent future land use map areas that the regional planning commissions across the state will use in a future land use map in their new plans. Some of those areas are tied to the state designation program, the community investment program. So as the land use review board approves a regional plan, it will also confer designations for certain of those future land use map areas that are depicted on your maps. The reforms basically establish a tiered geographic jurisdictional trigger for Act 250. There will be areas of exemption called Tier 1. There will be areas of increased jurisdiction or increased scrutiny called Tier 3. And then everything that's not Tier 1 and 3, Tier 2, will essentially be the status quo, except that what was used to be called the road rule, which was in effect for the first 20 years of the Act, is now being reinstated. And then finally, the Act changed the board that oversees the program, and it established the Land Use Review Board, which is a board of 5 professionals from different areas around the state. No 2 of us can be from the same county. And we have 5-year terms, and we are full-time employees of the state, all 5 of us. And we are tasked with rolling out the changes to Act 250 and to the governance of the program. Some of the goals of the reforms were to make it easier to build housing near existing centers and areas that are planned for growth. As I said, it establishes tiers, and the Tier 1A areas will confer total exemption from Act 250 for new development. Tier 1B areas will confer exemptions for housing projects that have up to 50 units. Another goal, or a tandem goal, was to protect critical natural resources, that by establishing this Tier 3 where all development will trigger Act 250 review. The board is tasked with rulemaking around a new criterion for Act 250 review that will protect forest blocks and habitat connectors. And as I said, it will reestablish the road construction jurisdictional trigger to encourage the clustering of development in Tier 2 and 3 areas. So here is a depiction with increasing jurisdiction of the tiers. Tier 1A, where there will be no jurisdiction. Tier 1B, where jurisdiction over housing is limited. Tier 2, which will have expanded jurisdiction because of this reinstatement of the road rule, as it's colloquially called. And Tier 3, where there will be enhanced jurisdiction to protect critical natural resources. So one of the ways that these tiers are being enacted is through a connection with regional and municipal planning, and particularly through the future land use map that is now going to include those 10 consistent future land use map areas that are described in statute now. So these 10 different future land use map areas are downtown and village centers, planned growth areas, village areas, transition infill areas, resource-based recreation areas, enterprise areas, and then point locations for very small hamlets, sort of crossroads with a couple of perhaps historic uses. And then the rural areas are to be divided into 3 different categories, one for conservation, one for agricultural and forestry uses, and one for just general rural. So by the end of this year, all 11 regional planning commissions will have had to adopt Act 181 compliant plans. And to get that determination of compliance, after adoption, the regional planning commissions will be applying to the Land Use Review Board to gain that determination. And with that determination, the state designations for centers and neighborhoods will be conferred, and any Tier 1B requests that we got from the Regional Planning Commission would also be conferred. The Tier 1B is the areas where there would be limited housing exemptions. So this is sort of a depiction of what we have now in terms of the community investment program, in terms of legacy or designated village centers, downtowns, new town centers. Those will all be just centers. The new program won't distinguish between types of centers. Excuse me. And then neighborhood development areas and growth centers will be termed neighborhoods. They will also not be distinguished. The future land use area categories that feed into the center and neighborhood programs are depicted on the other side of the slide here. Downtown centers and village centers will become centers, or will be designated centers as they are approved by the Land Use Review Board. And planned growth areas and village areas will be designated neighborhoods. As I said, by the end of this year, all 11 regional planning commissions must adopt an Act 181 compliant plan. And all state area designations will expire if the LURB does not approve that Act 181 compliant plan for a particular region. So all municipalities within a region that doesn't have a compliant plan will lose their state designation status if the plan is not approved by the board. So the Tier 1A is where the Act 250 will have no jurisdiction, and Tier 1A applications will come to the board directly from a municipality that wishes to receive that designation. So, well, I shouldn't call it a designation because it's not related to the downtown program. It's a status. A Tier 1A status is an Act 250 exemption status. So as soon as a regional plan is approved, any municipality within that region could apply to the board for Tier 1A status. And the process would be very similar to the way that the regional planning commissions are applying for their approval from the board. And I'll get into that more. I'll describe the process more after I go through this overview. But I just want to compare Tier 1A and Tier 1B for you. Tier 1B is, as I said, it's limited housing exemptions, and it is conferred when the Regional Planning Commission makes a request to the board, usually in conjunction with a regional plan approval request, but it doesn't have to be. So a Regional Planning Commission can come to us later with more requests for Tier 1B if they like. And the Tier 1B status would continue until modified by a plan amendment or until a regional planning commission comes in and either wants to add or subtract Tier 1B areas from their map. Tier 1A is, as I said, it comes from, it's applied for by the municipality. What it would mean is that there wouldn't be Act 250 jurisdiction in that area. And the municipality is basically taking responsibility for existing Act 250 permits. And if one of those previously permitted projects were to undergo an amendment, they would go to that particular community's DRB. They would get an amendment, and the DRB would have to study the previous Act 250 permit conditions to be sure that they were transferred to the municipality's decision, unless there was a condition that would no longer apply to the new project. Again, the status here continues until a map is modified by a new application to the board, or if the board determines that the municipality is not adequately enforcing or administering the Tier 1A development review, the board could revoke a Tier 1A status. So these are what you need to get these exemptions. For Tier 1B, it must be, well, for both of them, it must be either a downtown center or a village center or a planned growth area and village area. So those are the areas that are eligible for these Tier 1 exemptions. The municipality must have a confirmed plan, and it must have zoning and subdivision bylaws to get the Tier 1B or the Tier 1A exemptions. And if there is floodplain and river corridor in the Tier 1A or Tier 1B area, Tier 1B area, the municipality must have flood hazard and river corridor bylaws. And the municipality must have water or wastewater infrastructure serving that area, or if neither, it must have soils to accommodate compact housing with community level septic systems. Finally, the municipality must opt in with a resolution affirming the capacity to support development review and zoning administration in the area. And for Tier 1A, there are a few additional requirements. There's an application fee of $295. There is a required review after 4 years, and the board has, actually I should have updated this slide, the board has adopted guidance for Tier 1A applications, and that is available on our website. And again, the municipality must explain its capacity to administer and enforce previously permitted Act 250 permitted projects. So there is this dual effort in the Act 181 reforms. One was to enhance natural resource protection. And so I'm going to describe to you some of the charges that the new board had in that respect. We, excuse me. The board was charged with developing rules for Tier 3 jurisdiction. And I'll show you details about that in a few slides later. It has started working on guidelines for the road construction jurisdiction. The purpose of that road construction jurisdictional trigger is to discourage fragmentation and sprawl outside of growth areas. And it also instituted a new criteria of review. So forest blocks, to protect forest blocks and habitat connectors. So every application goes through the Act 250 review process, and the commission that delivers the decision on the permit application has to look at basically 33 criteria. And this criterion 8C is the newest, and we are in the process of developing rules around the 8C review as well. So we have for the tier 3 rulemaking, we are looking at 3 specific critical natural resource types. Significant natural communities from the S1, S2 categories, the very rare and the rare. Headwater stream areas on steep slopes with poorly drained soils at higher elevations, and habitat connectors that reflect the highest priority wildlife road crossing segments and the highest priority forest connectivity blocks that are bisected by roads. So we have put forth a couple of drafts to the public. They are and the rules are continuing. The rules of mapping are continuing to be revised based on feedback that we received. This is a slide that was created in October or November, and we are still working on particularly the habitat connectors and sort of honing that down to truly reflect what are the most critical. So these numbers, as this as this note says, are subject to change. But we are hoping to have a public hearing in, I think, June on a final rule before we send it off to the legislature, the Legislative Committee on Rules, which would then, there would be another public hearing process. But we're hoping to get it to the Legislative Committee on Rules by September 30th. The Tier 3 would go into effect on December 31st, 2026, so the end of this year. The road construction jurisdiction, also called the road rule, that trigger would go into effect on July 1. We are currently working on guidelines around what triggers the road construction jurisdiction, but also to perhaps provide guidelines about how development might be configured to not trigger the rule by clustering subdivision in a way that minimizes fragmentation of tier 2 and 3 areas of the state. As I said, we are also working on the 8C rulemaking. We are anticipating that to be on the same schedule to submission to LCAR by September 30th. So there would be public feedback through the spring and a public hearing in the summer before it goes on to the legislature for more hearings later in the year. And that also would go into effect on December 31st. And before actually I go to questions, I should just go back to the regional plan process. I thought I had another, in any case, what we are doing with regional plans is that the statute requires that regional planning commissions come to the Land Use Review Board with a draft of their plan. And they submit what is being called a pre-application to the board. The board then has 60 days to provide a response to that pre-application. And what we are doing with this pre-application is we are seeing it as a venue by which we can help the regional planning commissions get as much comment on those draft plans as possible, so that when it goes through the adoption process in your regions, you have addressed people's primary concerns as best as we can collect those concerns at the pre-application phase. So, so far we've looked at 3 regional plan pre-applications for Rutland, Chittenden, and Northwest, which is Grand Isle and Franklin counties. We just got an application from Addison this week, and last week we got one from Lamoille County. So once we give a response to the regional planning commissions, they are then going back and going through the adoption process. And then once you have adopted your plan, you will have to make this formal final application to the board. And the board will have to do a much more formal review, looking at every aspect of the plan that is required by statute and assessing whether the board will assess whether it meets the statutory standard or requirement or does not. So, and then we would issue this determination of compliance or affirmative determination, hopefully. And so that that process is described on our website in guidelines that we had set up. And if you want, I can show you our website so that you know how to find things on the website in terms of these regional plan pre-applications so far. It will be the same for the final applications, but we have set up a database that receives the information, and it's available to everybody, not just to the board, to understand where we are in terms of the review. And the other thing that we've set up is a map viewer. And I do want to show you the map viewer. If I can, I'm going to share again window and share. Here's the map viewer. And I'm going to just refresh it, see if the Addison map came through yet. There was a little glitch, and we do not yet have the Addison data. Oh, we do. It's there. So you are the first to see. You can see now that we have future land use map data for almost the entire western end of the state. So, and if you zoom in, here, let's zoom in something that's more closer to where we are now. Let's look at Rutland. And if you look at and you're seeing all this, right, as I move around?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the legend shows you what these different colored areas are, of course. Those are the 10 future land use categories that are now described in statute. There's also another category that regions can use called special use, and that's sort of up to you. If there's something that doesn't really fit any of the 10 in your region and you need, to describe a different future land use area category, that's what that special use is. In any case, if you go to this layer list, our map viewer has all kinds of different layers that are going to be important as we review these maps, including parcels, for example. So if we go down here to southern Rutland County and Danby, we can look at parcels relative to these various future land use map categories. We can also look at various physical features of the land. We can look at wetlands, or we can look at the occurrence of rare, threatened, and endangered species, or significant natural communities. So these are all mapped and by ANR, and we have access to that data on this map viewer. And in terms of rivers, we can look at flood hazard areas and river corridors that are mapped by ANR. So I just wanted to show you this. The other things that we can see is we can see the legacy. We can see, I'm going to turn some of this stuff off, but we can see the legacy designations from the Community Investment Program. So let's see if Danby doesn't really have any. So let's see, Paulette does, I think. So let's see. Village centers. Pretty sure Paulette has some. So, oh, I've got to click this as well as that. So here you can see in Paulette that the orange hatch area is the legacy designation boundary, and you can see that Rutland Regional Commission is proposing to expand that a little bit. But I just wanted to show that to you so that you understand some of the tools that we're using in our review. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about the pre-application process. Let me stop sharing and get back to the video feed. Where are you all? Hold on a sec. Where are you? There you are. Okay. So the pre-application, I think, is a conversation. It's a conversation between the board and the Regional Planning Commission and any interested party that has a stake in the plan for a particular region. That can include other agencies within state government. It can include your municipalities or interest groups within your region. We've also been receiving a request for notice from the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is very interested in following the approvals of these plans. And so what we're hoping to do is facilitate deep conversation about your draft plans at this early phase so that we can avoid last minute objections after you have already adopted your plans. And what we're hoping to do is give you information about whether we feel that it looks like your plan appears to meet the statutory standards and whether it looks like there might be areas where it doesn't. And if it doesn't, we want to be sure to give you very specific information about why we think it might not. And we might give you very specific information or very specific requests for information that we would need in order to make an affirmative determination at that final phase. So with that, I'll stop and ask if there are questions.
All right, I see Eric and then Jim.
Is there any appeal process either by a landowner or a municipality for the designation of Tier 3 on a given parcel of land?
There will be there will be something in the rules that addresses corrections to the map. I don't know that it will be called an appeal process, but there will be a process for modifying the Tier 3 boundaries.
Just a comment that in Grafton, we are feeling a little bit blindsided. We're all volunteers. We don't follow state rules as a normal course of our daily life. To find significant parts of our town essentially restricted strongly on development where it wasn't before, and there was no particular interaction with the municipality, planning commission, or people prior to that designation. We're a little upset.
Well, that's part of the process. Getting you upset now before it goes to the final rule committee at the legislature and getting your feedback now. And that's why it's undergoing revisions now. So what you saw initially is probably not going to be what it looks like when it comes out of this next iteration of revisions. So one of the things, Eric, that the board was tasked with is to do an analysis once it has an initial map, to conduct an analysis that that assures that towns are not being disproportionately affected, in the sense that it's not giving towns enough opportunity for those areas of exemption in the tier 1 areas. So the idea is that the tier 3 critical natural resource areas are going to be relatively small and perhaps even less extensive than the areas that would be eligible for the Act 250 exemptions. And the other thing about tier 3 is that it will likely, it seems, not confer jurisdiction for the entire parcel like Act 250 currently does. It might just be that the Act 250 jurisdiction will be limited to that tier 3 area. And it might also be that the criterion that would be reviewed would be those that are most relevant to that particular resource. So instead of every one of the 33 criteria, it might only be those that are most relevant to that critical natural resource. But to answer, or the short answer is, it's still under review, and the public feedback that we've been getting is being taken very seriously. And we're still working on honing that map of tier 3 areas down.
Okay, I think our areas are more related to habitat connectors of forest blocks than to special environments or species.
The rare communities and the headwater stream areas. Yes. And yeah, there's going to be a certain disproportionate amount of critical natural resources, probably in areas that are more rural and less developed. And so the question is, the trick the board's going to have to figure out is, where's that line that is, too burdensome? And that's where your feedback to the board is very important. That's why we took the first iteration on the road, so to speak, and visited various parts of the state with public meetings to gather that feedback. And we're going to be doing that again with a next iteration very soon.
Okay, thank you. And I think, Eric, if you have specific questions about, giving public feedback, maybe you can email us if you don't know how to do that, and we can get you the best information.
And Janet, I assume that you don't mind being contacted directly?
I do not. And I should show you our website. I meant to do that. But if there's time, I do have a couple more minutes, and I see a lot of hands up, though.
So yeah, I was going to say, I think we should do questions, and then maybe we can circulate the website to everybody afterwards if we get it from Chris, or we could put it in the chat here.
Yeah.
So we have a number of questions. I know Jim was next. Then I see Rick, Andy, and Steve. So Jim?
Looking at the requirements for level 1A and 1B, specifically it addressed zoning. There's an awful lot of towns in the state and in Wyndham that do not have zoning. Is that going to put them out of business for input to your to the board?
Not input, no. It will mean that they cannot apply for, or they can't request the tier 1A or tier 1B status. So they would not be eligible for those Act 250 exemptions. It doesn't mean.
Town,
sorry?
would the town plan cover that? Mostly when you don't have zoning, you rely on the town plan.
Yeah, the way the legislation is written, you must have zoning in order to gain the exemption.
Okay.
And remember, this is for most towns, this is going to be the tier 1B. And what that confers is exemption on housing projects that have up to 50 units of housing.
Thanks for that question, Jim. And we only have a couple minutes, so I might ask people to email us the questions, but Rick, you are next.
Thanks. Jim asked my question, so I will take
Oh,
note of
okay.
Perfect. You're getting me up to my time limit here. Excellent. Andy Snelling, you are next.
Um, Townsend, where I reside, is one of those rural towns, no zoning. So no opportunity for 1A or B. But we also have a disproportionately amount, I would say, of what is proposed tier 3. So very large amount of the acreage in town is going to be tier 3 as proposed currently. And with that in mind, could you give me a little bit more definition of how the road rule, I know there's the discussion about between 800 and 2,000 feet, how that is applied to determine the tier 3 area?
The road rule is not related to tier 3. Tier 3 is identifying critical natural resource areas that would be delineated, and in that area, Act 250 would apply. And it's not related to the road rule. Road rule would apply in those areas as well, but typically those areas are going to be probably in most of the road rule is going to be in tier 2, because tier 3 is going to be a much smaller portion of your land area, even in Townsend. So
Pretty large.
yeah, tier 2 is going to be most of the state. And that's where the road rule would apply, along with the tier 3 areas.
Okay, I must have misunderstood them. I looked at the proposed mapping and it seemed that there were two different areas being shown for tier 3, one which appeared to be 800-foot rule and a 2,000-foot rule.
So no, there is a connection there. The tier 3 mapping thus far is looking at significant natural communities, the very rare and rare significant natural communities. It's looking at headwater stream areas that are on steep slopes with low, shallow soils. And thirdly, it's looking at habitat connectors and forest connectivity connectors along roads. And the question that the working group is grappling with is whether they should go with 800 feet or 2,000 feet based on the road rule jurisdictional trigger for that tier 3 area. And they're still grappling with that and thinking about it. And the reason that it's tied is because the resource would be protected by the road rule outside of the 800 or 2,000 feet, because the road rule trigger is 800 feet for a new road or 2,000 feet for all roads and driveways combined for new development. So that's a question that the tier 3 working group is still grappling with, as to how far on those road segments that have those high priority habitat connectors, how far from the road should that extend?
Okay.
So tier 3 would not start for, let's say, 800 feet off the road. Is that what you're saying?
It would be sort of a buffer on the road, right? So because if it were 800 feet, you would have 1,600 feet with the road in the center of protected critical high priority habitat connector, right? So that's the tier 3 area. Further than that, the road rule would protect because it's further away from the road, and to get to it, you would have to have a longer road. So that's not going to be in tier 3 because the road construction jurisdiction would trigger. Does that? It's sort of like it's like the opposite of what you would think, right? The very much interior forests and habitats don't need to be protected by tier 3 because the road rule will protect them, in the sense that the road rule will trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. It's only those areas that are close to roads that are high priority habitat connectors and forest blocks that need the protection because of the road rule. So there is a connection, but it's not that there's a connection in the sense that the road rule triggers are what the tier 3 buffer on that road is trying to decide, what's the length that should be used to trigger or to identify what's critical natural resource to be protected under tier 3.
I think
just
that
I
maybe
wanted
if we
to
have more
add to Eric's
questions,
comment that from a
I
representative
think
of
if we have
rural
more
area.
if we have more questions, I think we should just maybe connect you two, or so that there can be an offline discussion. Because I think we're getting a little bit in the weeds, and I'm trying to keep on time, and I want to get the one last question in. So I think these are all good questions. And I think, I want to make sure that they get answered, but maybe we could do that one as we continue the discussion offline. But so we'll be in touch with you, Andy. Steve, last question.
My question is quick and it's high level. When will the rest of the tier mapping, the viewer be done so we can see, and will it be for all the tiers?
So as we approve regional plans, the tier 1A will go into effect. So it'll be sort of patchwork across the state throughout this year as we approve regional plans. But tier 3 does not go into effect until December 31st. So the only tiers that will be in effect are tier 1 A and B until the end of the year when tier 3 goes into effect. And then everything that's not tier 1 and tier 3 will be called tier 2. But in the interim,
you'll complete the viewer as the plans are approved.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
All that data that's in the viewer is submitted to us by the regional planning commissions.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gabby, I put a quick clarifying question. I think it's quick in the chat, but if you don't mind me asking it, which is, Janet, I don't think it's clear. Does land, by inclusion in tier 3, does that preclude development on those tier 3 lands? I think that's a big
No, it does
question
not.
a lot of people have. I think the assumption is if it goes into Act 250, you can't develop it.
No, it's not no development. It's that you need to get a permit. And then the question is, the other things that the working group is looking at is putting a 2-acre buffer basically around existing homesteads so that you can, put up your barn, you can do other things on that land without triggering Act 250 if you're in tier 3, up to a certain extent. But no, it is not a no development zone. It's an Act 250 trigger. So it's a permit trigger, basically.
All right. Thanks, Janet, for being here. Thanks for questions. And again, please email me and or Chris if you can, I think that was a lot of information. Janet, I think you'll be willing to give us your presentation so we can circulate it to the commission. I do think that was a lot of information, and I think there is some, I think everybody's really interested, which is great. So I think it would be, would you be willing to share out the presentation with us?
Yeah, I shared it with Chris and Matt earlier. So
okay.
I shared a PDF so they can circulate that, and I can direct people to the Land Use Review Board website, and you can certainly find a lot more information there about all of these activities that we are up to.
All right, great. Thank you so much for being here. I think this is we'll transition now. I see Matt and Alyssa coming online. So I think the question is, we heard sort of about the process, that's specific to the regional plan, the new process, and how does our new regional plan now fit into this process and the status? So I'll turn it over to Matt and Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby, and Janet. Thanks for being here this evening. Nice to see everyone. So I just wanted to provide just an update on where Wyndham Regional is in terms of updates to our regional plan to meet these new Act 181 requirements. I think I was at the full commission meeting about a year ago now to present on Act 181 and what our expected timeline was for the regional plan update. But as you know, and as Gabby mentioned, Wyndham Regional was in the process of updating their regional plan, when Act 181 went into effect. And we made a decision to go ahead with updating our plan in July, and not meeting all the Act 181 requirements. But because we were so far along in our process, we wanted to just formally adopt it and get that out of the way before turning to the Act 181 requirements. So that's what we're in the midst of now, is updating our plan to meet the Act 181 requirements. So some RPCs were in a similar position to some RPCs where their update is a little more straightforward because they're just trying to satisfy the Act 181 requirements. Some RPCs, just given their planning cycle, are doing a more comprehensive overhaul of their plans, just because that's how the timing has worked out. So I would say our update is more targeted. Primarily we're in terms of the plan content, we're needing to update our land use chapter, obviously, based on the new land use districts in Act 181. I think we've discussed this before, that there's a lot of similarities between our existing future land use districts and those that are defined in statute under Act 181. And part of that is the regional planning commissions were very involved in the legislative process in developing Act 181. And all the regional planning commissions had existing future land use districts. We just all had different districts. And so, part of the goal here is to have consistency across the state. But regional future land use planning is not something new for RPCs, not new for Wyndham Regional. So there's not a significant change, at least for our regional plan, when it comes to our existing future land use districts and what we're required to update the map to meet the Act 181 requirements. So the land use section is definitely this section of the plan that's going to be the most comprehensive update. We'll also need to do updates to the housing section because there are regional and municipal housing targets that need to be included in our plan as part of this process. And then, of course, throughout the plan, there's just terminology that needs to be updated based on some of the other Act 181 reforms. But I would say the primary changes will be to the land use and housing sections of our plans, as well as the regional future land use map. While we were working on the 2025 regional plan that was adopted in July, we have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to gear up for this other update process. So we did hold a workshop for municipal officials back in June to provide a similar overview to what Janet provided on Act 181. We've been working on the draft regional future land use map, and we've been going kind of town by town in that mapping process. And as those draft maps are done, we've been putting them on our website, and then also doing outreach to towns to review those maps if they want to meet with us to review them and kind of understand what some of the changes are. We're beginning to draft that content to our regional plan, to the 2025 regional plan, to meet those requirements. And we also are maintaining a page on our website that provides links to the Land Use Review Board's website, and we put together our own summary of Act 181. And one thing that's been really helpful throughout this process is the regional planning commissions have been meeting. At first, it was bi-monthly, and now it's a monthly meeting where staff from the different RPCs working on the Act 181 regional plan updates have been able to meet and kind of share stories about how the process has gone for them. And it's been very beneficial. Janet often attends those meetings. So that has been a collaborative process throughout between the RPCs and the Land Use Review Board, because we're all figuring this out and needing to work together. Just to give you a sense of kind of general our timeline going forward to meet the requirement of having an adopted regional plan by the end of this year. Between over the next few months, we are focused on those updates that I just talked about. We're going to be completing the draft maps for the entire region by the end of February, and holding meetings with towns between now into the spring as those maps are completed. We have a goal of submitting our draft plan to the Land Use Review Board in May. So that's what Janet had mentioned, is that pre-application process where the LURB has the 60-day review period. So our goal is to submit our plan in May, and then we would get comments back, depending on when that's submitted, at some point in July, and then make revisions based on comments from the LURB. We also need to still hold 2 public hearings in the region, which is the adoption process that we went through for our current 2025 plan. So we will also hold public hearings after we get those comments back from the LURB. And the goal would be to, after we go through that public hearing process and make any last revisions, to have the full commission vote to adopt the plan later in the fall before that December 31st deadline. So we're on track for completing the plan update by December. But yeah, there's a fair amount of work between now and when the draft plan would be submitted to the LURB in May. So that's just an update on where we're at. I did want to note, I have been the staff lead on the Act 21 regional plan update, just given other projects I'm working on. We are kind of passing the project management role over to Alyssa at our office. I'm still involved in the effort, but just given other projects I'm working on, I can't be the primary staff member to see this through to final adoption. But so if there are any questions, if the commissioners have any questions now, I'm happy to respond to those, but also feel free to reach out to me or Alyssa with questions as well.
All right, thanks, Matt. And Laura, you have a question?
I do. Matt, given that the plan, do you have any concerns about the plan being approved after the road rule goes into effect, which is the majority of the landmass? So significant increased regulation?
I personally don't have concerns, Laura. I think because the road rule is separate from our regional plan. So, what we have in our regional plan, in terms of the future land use mapping that we're doing, it's not connected with the road rule. So the road rule will be based on kind of the distance from the road, and that's gonna be kind of not impacted by what we have in our regional plan. The regional plan, I think it'll be important for the regional plan to include some discussion about these other reforms happening with Act 250, such as the road rule in Tier 3. But I kind of see it as two separate things. So, we have our regional planning process. What we map in our future land use map doesn't affect Tier 3 status either. So I understand there's a lot of kind of connections and overlap, but I think it's important to make that distinction too between what we're responsible for and what the LURB is responsible for. Does that answer your question?
It does, and that's helpful. I do have a follow-up question, which is, I think I note that we have 12 towns that are not here this evening, and I know that that is not unusual. But I just wonder to what extent you're feeling like you have towns engaged in this, what Janet has indicated, 50 years, this is historic legislation. Do you feel like you have the attention of all the towns?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So as I mentioned, we're mapping for the future land use mapping. We're doing that town by town and reaching out to towns as we go along. I would say there's different levels of I guess engagement and interest. As I've mentioned, from my perspective, there's not a huge change between how we've done our future land use mapping in the past and what the reforms under Act 181, especially for because we have many towns that are not eligible either for Tier 1A or Tier 1B because they don't have zoning and subdivision in place. So I think for our towns that don't have zoning and subdivision in place, I think there's interest in because Act 181 includes changes to the state designation program. There are interests in, we have an existing village center. Is there an opportunity to expand it to include some?
Oh,
And Matt,
lost Matt.
Matt, the towns that we've already completed the draft, the drafts for Brattleboro, Londonderry, Newfane, Weston, Wyndham, and Winhall. We've met with all those, haven't we already?
oh, he's off the hot seat.
I think he's frozen.
I think he's frozen or he lost his internet connection.
Okay, that was it for me. Thank you so much.
Do you have a
Yeah.
suggestion? I mean, do you have a specific suggestion that you want to make to the commission?
So those questions I was asking as a commissioner, I think that the commission needs to think very hard about the awareness within the region of these changes. And I don't have a specific suggestion right now as to how to further promote this. I know that Janet has been at so many meetings. I don't know that she sleeps. And so I appreciate that she is out. I'm thinking of more meetings I'd like to ask her to attend to. And I would just say, taking off my commissioner hat, putting on my legislative hat, I would just say I'm quite worried about the timelines. I think that they are quite aggressive given the historic nature of this and the extensive work that is clear the LURB is doing when these maps come in and the revisions and the engagement. And so I appreciate all of the commissioners who are here tonight. And I think this is worthy of continued meetings, Gabby. I think that this is something that should be of great focus for the commission, at least in the short term. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Laura. Janet, you want to say something?
Yeah, just I think Laura's question about being worried about the regional plan being adopted after the road rule goes into effect is a really important question because there are, even in all of your towns, there will be areas that could have this tier. Well, not all of them can have tier 1A, but the idea is that tier 3 is not going to be ending up in the village centers, downtown centers, planned growth areas, or village areas. So all of your towns will be able to have those areas for growth without tier 3 triggering Act 250. And the same would be true for the road rule. Those areas, I think the road rule is meant for tier 2 and tier 3, not tier 1. But so the question is, in those areas that are going to be mapped on your regional plan map as downtown centers, village centers, planned growth areas, and village areas, those could confer a certain status where the road rule doesn't apply if they get tier 1B or tier 1A status. So I think that's what Laura was getting at, is that you could have some instances if there are, developments on the, in the planning stages this year that would trigger a need for Act 250 by the road rule because you haven't had your regional plan map approved yet. It's probably going to be minimal, but it could be critical for somebody, right? So I guess I would just suggest, having feelers out there, and if there are developments in the works that you know of, make sure that in these towns that that it's something that can, so you can have a conversation with the developer as well as the town officials and the BCRC, or not the BCRC, the WRC. Sorry, it's my BCRC roots.
One thing I'll just note is Janet's colleague, Alex Weinhagen, has offered to meet with any town as often as they'd like to meet. He's met with Grafton already twice. And I think we've got a newsletter coming out this week that basically, I think it includes that offer, and it doesn't, Matt. And if you want to see how that goes in the chat, I put in a link to the first Grafton meeting, if you just want to kind of see how that conversation went. And it's I think Eric and Cheryl, I think it's about 2 hours long, right? So it's a pretty deep hour and a half, maybe. It was a pretty lengthy meeting. So if you will kind of want a taste of what the conversation looks like, feel free to look at that. Frankly, from my perspective, the road rule is going to be more impactful than tier 3. There's a lot of energy is going in a tier 3 discussion, but really it's the road rule.
Yep.
That where a lot more landowners are going to be impacted by being kicked into Act 250 jurisdiction. And I think that's another thing, again, just to clarify, is it's a jurisdictional thing. It means that, because right now, you can build a home in some towns without zoning with only a septic and well permit, and that's it. What this means is you would now go into a permitting process, and the rules about how that ultimately is going to apply are still being developed. But
right.
Is that a fair statement, Janet?
You would go into the permit process if your road was 800 feet or longer, right, or if a combination of road and driveways was 2,000 feet or longer. Right. So you can build a house still, unless without triggering, unless your driveway is a really long driveway.
Right, so. Right. But I guess that's what I was saying was, again, it's just these are jurisdictional triggers. It's not. Yeah. By default, if you're in tier 3 or you're in if you build in that road that would trigger Act 250, doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means right, you are now going to have somebody is now going to review your development.
Yeah. And just so people know, Alex Weinhagen is a board member, and he is the board member that is spearheading the tier 3 process. the road rule jurisdictional trigger process is being spearheaded by Sarah Had on the board, along with Brooke Dingledine. It had been Kirsten, but Kirsten is busy with some other things, so we sort of rearranged who was taking on the road rule. And we are talking about the road rule at our regular board meetings now, and we will be for the next few months before presenting. It's really not rulemaking, it's guidance. So we are developing guidance on this road jurisdictional trigger. And that, as Laura pointed out, would go into effect July 1 of this year.
All right, so I feel like this is really good conversation. Again, I feel like let me touch base with Chris, and I personally need to, I think, digest the information that Janet gave to us tonight. So it might be worthy of getting this Janet's packet out, having further discussions, and I think we should, add this to our agenda. We have a meeting next month, so I think at least a status update is warranted. So given that we've blown out our time tonight, that's fine. But I think that's also an indicator that it needs more discussion. So we will do that. And thanks to everyone who participated. But again, I think it was a lot of information, and at least I did not have time to read all of the rules before this meeting. So
and I just wanted to apologize quickly that my internet had cut out a few minutes ago. So I apologize, Laura. I was responding to your question and then the internet dropped. So sorry.
It's quite okay, Matt. Yeah. You did a great job. Thank you.
All right. With that, I'm going to sort of shorten people's time periods. And again, we'll put this on for next meeting for our follow-up discussion.
And Janet, you don't have to stay. Feel free to depart if you'd like.
Hey, I'm one of your people. I'm staying.
The rest of the meeting, I don't think will be as interesting. Sorry. But you're absolutely welcome to stay. So next up is the executive director's report. And Chris, I'm just going to ask you to keep it to 5 minutes if you can. And if we need to get your report out in an email, we can do that. If that's right. Chris, you're muted.
6 years of this now, and I'm still getting used to meeting and unmeeting. Okay. So I sent everybody, all the commissioners, a letter that I sent to the legislature on my behalf, and also in my role as the RPC point person on emergency planning and disaster recovery, noting that RPCs have basically been sidelined in our emergency planning work because of the nature of the FEMA Emergency Management Performance Grant Program. The state hasn't gotten its funding, therefore the sub-applicants haven't gotten theirs. And so we've basically been sidelined since October. I think this is hugely impactful. We've talked a lot about Act 181 and land use planning, but really, when our main role in life safety planning really comes about in the hazard mitigation planning, helping towns apply for grants for mitigation projects, working with the EMDs, participating in the Regional Emergency Management Committee and other things. And so we have zero funding to support that now. This is also the funding that we have typically used for most of the work we do around helping towns update their flood hazard bylaws, and also training and zoning at floodplain administrators. So the letter goes into detail about what the implications are. Please take a look at it. There's really nothing to be done because all this is happening in federal processes. But one thing I will note is that one of the requirements of sub-applicants and Wyndham Regional Commission, all the RPCs would be considered sub-applicants, is FEMA is proposing a new rule that would require us to provide bios or resumes of all commissioners. And most of the RPCs are thinking that would probably be a non-starter. Because you guys have nothing to do with that project administration. But this is a nationwide requirement. This isn't just for Vermont. This is nationwide. So right now we don't know what the requirements are of sub-applicants, because right now we don't even know what the requirements are of the states. But this is something I want the legislature to be aware of, because it just seems to me there should still be some municipal support capacity for emergency planning. And also, Vermont Emergency Management is funded by like 90% of their funding is federal. And they don't have anything right now. They're winnowing down their 2024 funding. So this hadn't got a lot of attention, but I think it should get a lot more than what it is. So just putting that out there. We have a new website. Take a look. I just discovered a dead link just now, but please explore and do not hesitate if you find a dead link or something to let myself or Jeff Nugent or Ashley know. You're not going to hurt our feelings at all. It is a complete overhaul. So don't be nervous about that. Our audit has been completed. What we expect to get that in March, so we will present that to the full commission. It was great. They've done all the field work. There are no findings or anything. And they really commended the work that our finance manager, Nessa Muse, has done. And I know this auditor, they work with a lot of the RPCs in the state, and it's not often that you get such high praise and no findings. So we're really proud of that. And last but not least, I talked to the exec board about it. You can watch a recording. I'm going to use Emergency Management Performance Grant as an example. We are going to have to start thinking about what our protocols are for when we ask towns to enter into a municipal service agreement with us. We just like with the Emergency Management Performance Grant, we don't have the funding that we typically would to do things like hazard mitigation planning, grant development, flood hazard bylaw updates in some cases, and other things like that. And so we're going to have to figure out like what is the threshold where by default, when we don't have something else that we can charge that time to, and working with towns, when we're going to have to enter into an agreement with them to basically pay for that time. So I'm going to be developing a proposal for consideration by the executive board, but that'll also be coming to full commission once we come up with something rational. So, but just a heads up that our revenue streams are getting cut off, and we're going to have, in order to maintain the capacity that towns expect, they're going to have to contribute more to the time when we can't. So this is not a money-making venture. This is just, but we have to be able to charge that time to something. It's just an odd structure, the funding structure of regional planning commissions in Vermont and really New England, where we're 95% grant funded. So that's just the nature of the beast. And so we're going to have more conversations around that. So, but I'll be bringing that to you guys at a future meeting. And that's all I've got.
All right, thanks so much, Chris. And again, so I think the important things are the FEMA. You saw the letter, it was circulated. The federal government wants our resumes, which I'm pretty sure is going to be a non-starter from most volunteers. B, we have a new website. The 181 link, actually, it was I was looking around. We have found things that just haven't need to be reset as a result of the switch over to the new website. But I think the new website looks great. It's really user-friendly. Please do take a look at it if you haven't already. And then 3 is, our revenue streams, as everyone knows, contract-based. We do get we do ask for at town meeting, certain amount of funding from the towns, but it's a very small amount of our funding where we want to provide the same level of service to our towns. The way to do that is actually we will have to contract potentially with the towns directly now for certain services that don't fit under any other umbrella. All right. Okay. Moving on, project review committee report. Jim, I'll give you like 2 minutes if you can summarize anything important.
That's plenty. Process Review Committee hasn't met for quite a while. We're having our first meeting on the 3rd. We have a couple of issues to go over. We're wondering right now whether or not we need some very serious training on Act 181 and the potential that can have with our 250 approval process. Other than that, stay warm out there.
Thanks, Jim. And good idea about the additional training. I think that's a great idea.
And for context, we have some new commissioners. Gabby, if you don't mind me just jumping in real quick. The reason why the project review committee wouldn't meet is because they don't have any projects to review. It's not lack of desire or interest. It's just there's nothing there for them to review. So that's the reason.
Thanks, Chris. All right, moving on to chair's report. I'm going to keep myself to like 1 minute. You all have the new schedule for calendar year 2026 for the meetings of the commission, where our next meetings are February, April, July, August, October. I'm expecting August will be our usual annual meeting. And I think we should just make sure our schedule we comports with what we're going to need to do to approve our regional updated regional plan as well. So we'll look into that. But right now, those are the minimum dates. I'll put it that way.
And the February presentation is going to be UMass Amherst. We worked with them on a 4-town flood adaptation charrette and scenario planning process. These are 4 towns in the Deerfield Valley, and so they'll be presenting the results of that work. I think they did a fantastic job. A lot of discussion in that work about potential intermunicipal collaboration. I love the way they framed it. It was freedom, of course, for towns to make their own choices, but to being able to do more by unifying together to do more together. So I thought that was a great spin on the Vermont motto, do more together by unifying. So.
All right. And then next up is public comment. This is for any comments about something that is not on the agenda. All right, hearing and seeing none. Next up is I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Jim. Do I have a second? All right, I'll give it to Art. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here tonight and for your discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Janet for being here tonight. Thank you to Matt and Alyssa. And I also saw Jeff Nugent there for being here tonight from staff. And we'll follow up with our action items, which is circulate the presentation and have a status update for next month's meeting. All right, with that, non-debatable motion, all those in favor of adjourning, raise your hand, either virtually or physically. Perfect, I think that's everyone. Put your hands down. Any opposed? Any abstained? All right, motion carries. We are adjourned at 7:30 p.m. Thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Janet.